Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Garth Mullins. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. I'm part of a drug user union there called the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. And also, I make the Crackdown podcast with Lisa here. She's a producer on it. And Cal, I think, at the back, who lived here for years and at Kilmarnock, and also lived in Vancouver. So he's a Scottish boy come home to help us figure out how our two places are connected. So I used heroin from the late 80s, early 90s, all the way past the millennium, and I also have been on methadone for about 16 or 17 years, and there was some overlap between all of that. And I hear a lot of people saying, oh, on methadone for so long, that's like being parked on methadone, and it's actually worked out really well for me, and I felt like I was driving really fast and dangerously on a motorway, and so I don't mind being parked so much, you know. Since I've come here, I've been kind of surprised at the debate around methadone, but what the last speaker was saying really rings true to us at home too. And I'll tell you a little bit about why. We make this podcast, Crackdown, because the media was getting just about everything wrong about drugs and the drug war in Canada. And so we just started to decide we better do it ourselves. And this is what's available to us. I've made radio before for the equivalent of the BBC over there as a freelancer, the CBC in Canada. And so we started making the documentaries every month. And one of the first ones we wanted to make was about methadone, because we're having a problem that has a similar effect to what's going on here. So in 2014, people like me, there were thousands and thousands of us in British Columbia happily on methadone, trying to piece things together and lead our lives. And then they switched all of us to this, from this sort of generic, regular, it's mixed in with Tang back home, to this new, pharmaceutical branded formulation. And overnight, people started getting dope sick, like, Rattling in the morning, and it wouldn't hold you anymore. So within a week, thousands of us were dope sick, and that meant we were topping up. So lots of people who hadn't used heroin for a long time were going and getting heroin or whatever else to try and top back up. And this is 2014, 2015. This is just when our overdose crisis started going, and yours too. And so we found we've got the same as you, like 26 to 30,000 people on OST. And a good half, probably or more, have been waking up and being sick every day for the last 5 years. And so we're feeding this crisis, because methadone's got one job. It's supposed to make sure you're not sick, and it's failing at that job. And while it's a different situation here, you have underprescribing, which is causing it. It's the same effect. You're never going to get ahead if you're feeling sick. But at the same time, you have all this narrative out there that it's the opposite. The truth is it's underprescribing. That means it's not enough methadone. And you have all these people loudly saying in public, oh, it's too much methadone in Scotland, too much methadone. But I mean, that to me is just an irresponsible public health message in the middle of an emergency like this. So we have been trying to sort out back at home, trying to get us back to the old methadone, back to something that works better, so that we're not having the same effect as you, as being underserved by it every day. And we've done that through drug user activism. So I'm part of a group called the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, and also the BC Association of People on Methadone. And these are groups that are made up of drug users and people who take methadone every day. And we go and insist that we sit at the table where they're writing the policy. So you have this orange book here. I guess it's written in London. It's all the rules about how methadone's supposed to work. I'm still trying to get a copy, so if anyone has one, by the way. And we have one back home, and the rules often don't reflect what we really need. So when I was at a meeting with some drug users from around Glasgow here last night and the day before, and people talked about how they'll cut you off really fast and have a really slow titration up if you get lifted over the weekend or something like that. We've been really leaning into that policy back at home to try and fix things like that, because drug users, we actually know better than the people who are writing those policies. Like, we know the law better because we've experienced it. Like, I've been arrested in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. We know prescribing better. I've been to a pharmacy more days than probably most people will in their life to get the methadone, and you know, we have that direct experience, and we know the policy better than the policymakers because we live it every day. It outlines the contours of our lives. And so that's why we say nothing about us without us. So if something is happening that affects so deeply our lives, like in fact whether we get to keep living or not, we're really insisting at being at the table. And that's still, even though drug user activism in Canada and Vancouver has been around for about 20, 25 years, it's still a work in progress. We're still fighting for it. And so we're still struggling to get some kind of justice on this methadone situation. But when I came here and I saw the underprescribing and stuff, I just thought, oh, this feels so familiar. You know, like you have an overdose crisis and people aren't getting one of the few tools that's legally allowed in the toolbox. We're not even allowed to put our hand on properly. Another tool that seems trouble to get here is the overdose prevention sites, or drug consumption rooms, or there's a million names for them. And we have back home, we have Insight in Vancouver and a bunch of others. But let me tell you, no government ever gives that to you. So the Scottish government can say it's London, and they can say back and forth. Well, we kind of had the same thing. We had a local government saying it's the government in Ottawa, and certainly some governments were more in favor than others, and you prefer ones that are sympathetic. But they're going to drag their feet, and they'll point at other governments as an excuse. But it's been my experience that nobody wins rights by a benevolent leader handing them to you. We always have to fight for them. We always have to arm twist. So what we did in Vancouver is open them without permission. We just opened them illegally first. And we did it smart. We made sure that the people who were on the front who would be potentially risking arrest were people who could take it, people who weren't going to get sacked from their third sector job the next day, or people who weren't drug users who were going to get lifted and be sick in jail, or potentially have warrants. The police are looking for them for something. So we found the right kind of people to be in the front of this. But we rented a storefront and just started it up. And we kind of dared the police to come and arrest us. Say, fine, arrest somebody, then we have a court case, and we'll fight it all the way up, and we'll show that we have the rights to this, the civil and constitutional rights to not die. And so the police were actually, they knew we wanted to do that, so they wouldn't do it. And eventually we embarrassed the government into opening these things. Now, we had a bunch of Tory wankers in Ottawa for a decade or more, and they fought us through the courts. They tried to shut this down. They tried to shut it down. They couldn't. But what they did is they cost us a whole decade where we just had one. And there was a lineup for half an hour outside of this place, Insight, and no one's going to, if you're sick, you're not going to be waiting around for half an hour, even though lots of people did, even though it was a long lineup. And it was always the idea to not have one, not have this little pilot project to see if it works. It works. We don't need to study it anymore. It works, it works, it works. You need to have lots. You need to distribute them where people are, where people need them. And right now in Canada, we have done that. We have distributed them more. So when the overdose crisis, my second, started in Canada, in Vancouver, in British Columbia in 2014, 2015, 2016, we wanted to open more. But we still had these Tory wankers in power that wouldn't let us. It was a stalemate. So we just started doing it illegally again. People put a tent, like just like a big white tent in an alleyway, and we just started doing it there, and we had to do it illegally again. And I don't know of any jurisdiction that's won safe injection sites without doing it that way first. But we're just in a long tradition of people fighting for their rights using civil disobedience. I think that's what you got to probably do here, because our lives won't wait. We won't wait for Boris Johnson to get his head out of his ass in London. It's not going to work that way. And so I think we have to find the right way to do that. And everybody in this room plays a role. When we opened these unsanctioned drug consumption rooms in Vancouver first, there were third sector groups, NGOs we call them. There were nurses, medical professionals, people giving us advice, lawyers. Like my friend Ann always says, there's a drug user group, then there's a drug user group with a lawyer. So it's good to have a lawyer. And we kind of built that coalition. We built that force so that when people came after us, they knew none of us were standing alone. And I think building that kind of coalition is possible really anywhere in the world. So, you know, when our overdose crisis started, we had to do that illegally again. And right now, we're facing another round of this because our electorate, in all their great wisdom, has put some sort of little local northern Trump-style, sort of Boris Johnson-style people in power in two of Canada's provinces, the Ontario and Alberta. And they're both trying to figure out ways to shut down safe injection sites right now. Like, for example, in Alberta, they're having a review panel. Like when government goes to review panel something, I start to worry. And they've invited police and various kinds of concerned people, but no drug users, no researchers with direct knowledge of safe injection sites, drug consumption rooms. And they've said we can't really look at the health effects. We just have to look at the effect on local business and property owners. So this is a big whitewash to find a pretext to start shutting down these drug consumption rooms in Alberta, which have only been open for a couple of years. And British Columbia, where I'm from, this is where things are the worst. So we have a population of 4.5 million. I guess that's about 1 million less than Scotland in British Columbia. And for the last couple of years, we've had around 1,500 overdose fatalities every year. And so we've been busily giving out, probably over 150,000 naloxone kits. Ours look like this. It's like a case for your spectacles, and it says naloxone on it, and it has this clip. So this is how I carry it around. Just put it on the belt, walk around. Looks a little stupid at first, but everybody carries them, and people know that you have them. They can see, and it also reduces the stigma of it, right? So at first, a few years ago, the police would get a little, what are you doing? That has needles, and I've heard that from drug users here, that the police sometimes give them grief about having the naloxone kit, so people are a little frightened to carry it. So we have this design that makes it very sort of open and proud. And actually, I'll pass this around if you want to have a look, Joe. Just if people can rifle through it and see the stuff that's in it. Just make sure that gets back to Kirsten, because I'm going to give that to her for all her trouble to invite me here. And we've, in addition to naloxone, had the safe injection sites. And recently, some of the health authorities figured that we would have 2.5 times the amount of deaths had we not had these things. Specifically, had we not had safe injection sites. So they look at all of the thousands of overdoses that we've reversed in safe injection sites. And my group, the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, we have a sort of a storefront where we have meetings, we organize, and in the back room, that's a safe injection site. And we run it, like the drug users run the thing. We all know how to do naloxone. We have a tank of oxygen. We all know how to strap people up to that. And in fact, we're so good at gauging when someone's nodding or gouging versus when they're really falling out that we're great at watching people. You can see right that edge. And so we've never had anyone die there or in any safe injection site in Canada or anywhere else in the world that I've ever heard of. But we've reversed thousands of them. So in BC, we've reversed so many that the overdose death rate would be 2.5 times what it was. So that's 1,500 a year. If you do 2.5 times that gets us to 3,000 and, well, you guys are good at maths. Anyway, 3,000 and something. And that's basically the decision that people have to make here is, can you imagine next year or the year after a doubling or a doubling and a half of this rate? Because none of this goes away or gets better by itself. And in Vancouver, where I'm from, we had one of the first big prohibition laws got started there. So in 1908, there was they were building the railroad in Canada, bringing workers from China to do this. The frightened white middle class of Vancouver started to panic and say, we have to block up immigration, we have to, build walls at the borders, and all that sounds familiar. So this is 1907. And they basically have a riot where they go smash up Chinatown. And some government officials come in and they look at what damage was done, and they have a little inquiry. And this is what we do in Canada when we don't want to do something really. We have an inquiry about it. Y'all probably do the same. And they looked at the damages to businesses, and they suddenly found out, oh, there's opium production happening here. And so we had, very quickly, opium was made illegal. We had the Opium Act passed in 1908. It was the first big national one of the first big national drug prohibition laws in the world before the US. And so people would have been smoking opium in Vancouver in 1905. And it becomes illegal. So, okay, we have to do something different, to get opioids around. They become smaller. You see heroin get in there. Heroin becomes stronger. People need a bigger bang for the buck. They start injecting quickly after. The decades go by. The police chase down the heroin dealers. The heroin has to get sneakier and smaller and stronger. And by the time I'm on the scene in the late 80s and early 90s, we have China white heroin, which was really strong. And I quite liked it that way, but it was also very dangerous. And lots of people were overdosing. And that heroin was immensely stronger than the opium that people were smoking back decades before that. And then the police are chasing that around and enforcing that. And so then we get fentanyl comes to replace heroin. And now fentanyl is they're trying to seize it at the borders and they're chasing it around. So now we get carfentanil. So we've got elephant tranquilizers. So all this enforcement, all this don't do drugs, stamp it out, go arrest the dealers, crack down on it. All that's done is it's been like an arms race. It just spools up. The harder they crack down, the stronger the drugs get. It's the iron law of prohibition. And you don't have fentanyl here yet. You still have heroin. That's good. If there's any police here, don't arrest heroin dealers. Because once you do, you create the vacuum, and fentanyl will come here eventually. It will rush in. You already have benzos like activism and all that. We're just getting that now. And I've just, a month before I came here, I saw people overdosing, some people who work on the podcast actually overdosing on benzos and fentanyl and activism together, because it's all just mixed up and sold as heroin. And it was terrifying, because naloxone that we've all trained ourselves on, become used to working with, doesn't work on benzos. So we use it to get people back from the fentanyl problem, but it doesn't help with the rest. And that's just this escalation. Like every time they crack down, they create this vacuum and someone will come and fill it, this unregulated market. So some of us in Vancouver have been saying, we got to stop this. We've got to find a way that people can get safe, known quantities of heroin without all of this uncertainty and all of this death. Half of the people that I came up with that I knew when I was a kid are gone. And I tried to count the amount of people that I've lost, and I've got to 50. And I couldn't keep counting. I know it's more than that, but it was doing my head in. And when we were making this podcast, when we were making the episode I was telling you about methadone, about that new methadone that left people all messed up for 5 years. A lot of us on the editorial board were facing that, and one of them was my friend Charisse Kiwatin, and she was there with us from the beginning. I've known her about 5 or 6 years, and she was just sailing along on methadone, doing all right, like all the rest of us. They change her methadone. She starts getting sick. She starts using again. She could never get back, and we lost her in February, and she's dead, and she's dead because of the policy decisions that they made, and I will blame them forever for that. And they would not listen to us. We were raising the alarm years ago. They would not listen. This is why you need drug user activists at the table. Because without that, they'll go and maybe they had good intentions and they didn't know the consequences, or maybe they didn't care, or maybe they had some special arrangement with the pharmaceutical company. I don't know. We're still trying to figure that all out. But if we're not there, we can't stop it. And so they killed my friend, and so many like them. And so some of us are putting our heads together and saying, well, really what we should be doing is we should be pooling our money and importing pharmaceutical grade heroin and making a buyer's club where we can all just come and get it. And the government does not like that idea right now. Government never likes a good idea in the beginning. We kind of have to raise the political costs of them doing nothing. We kind of have to embarrass them into it, but that's where we are right now. Because naloxone and safe injection sites are critical, and methadone is critical, but these aren't going to do the whole job. You know, we've got such strong cocktails of synthetic opioids right now that I'm hoping that prescription heroin will, or heroin that we manage to get as a sort of a buyer's club, will be able to help people. But there's no guarantee. I mean, we've now started to think, do we need a fentanyl substitution program, where you substitute pharmaceutical fentanyl for the fentanyl that's in the drug stream? But you're not there yet. So you don't have fentanyl here yet. So you can take the steps to prepare yourself for if it comes, or even take the steps to prevent, to not do the things which would hasten its arrival. You know, if you have a relatively stable heroin distribution system in this part of the world, don't upset it. It's better than what will come next. And I hope for you that it doesn't come here, because it's changed my life. Losing so many people has rewired my brain. I'm sure I would be a different person had I not lived through this. And this is my second overdose crisis, so I know that if we don't get a hold of this prohibition, this making drug users illegal just by existing, then we're not going to get out of it. Then I'm going to see a third. And you know, it's Joe's birthday today, and somebody was earlier on joking. You know, there's always a joke about how we're old or something like that in the 40s. I'm 48. I'm fucking proud to be 48. I'm amazed that I've lived this long. You know, and I could see in the faces of the drug users from Glasgow that I was meeting with this week the same thing. And because I said to them, hey, someone told me that because of my age and the drugs I've used and the methadone and everything, if I'd lived here, I'd be from the train spotting generation. And they all laughed and said, yeah, us too. And then we had this discussion about the movie, and everybody told me that I was Spud. But then they changed their mind that it was Sick Boy, because of the hair. And you know, everyone identified their parts and told me where in the city certain things were filmed and stuff like that. But I felt right at home here really quick, you know, and I could see the same thing in their eyes. This incredible survival. Like, if you've gotten through decades of this terrible policy, and everyone's, you know, we were around when Nancy Reagan was just saying, just say no. And I was on the, the Kay Adams morning show on BBC Scotland yesterday, and they had a guy on there who was basically saying the same thing of just say no. And we've seen all the bad ideas. Like, we all have PhDs in the bad ideas of prohibition. And those are the people. Like, I saw Martin and Cass and Babs and Gary and a couple of others, some of whom are here today, who are so sharp. They are the leadership out of this clusterfuck that's going on here, which is so similar. Sorry for the constant swearing. This is just who I am now. Which is the same thing that's going on back home, and they have that lived expertise, and they can talk about how you know, this is a class A, this is a class B, titration at this rate, this mills. They know it inside and out, and those are the people to lead us out of this. This is what's missing here, or at least that I haven't seen, is that militant drug user organizing, that fight for civil rights that uses the same exact tactics as civil rights movements all over history, that isn't afraid to do demonstrations, to occupy MPs' offices, to use the civil disobedience tactics of setting up stuff even if it's not permitted. I know it's scary, right? And it was scary for all of us, because you're already made a criminal as a drug user, but there's ways that we can protect ourselves, and in my experience, it doesn't come without that. And that's why we made the podcast, the Crackdown podcast, because I wanted the world to see guys like Martin Coyle, you know, who are just sharp as hell, but get stereotyped in every other part of our lives as just being, I mean, in Canada, they just call us a zombie or a scumbag or whatever like that. But it's not the world I see. I see people, and I have an editorial board of 8 people, 7 people because of Sharice's death, that are just, they're the narco intelligentsia of Vancouver. You know, these are the people that I know can chart a path out of here, that have the answers. That room full of people in the rooms here, we could stop the overdose crisis and the HIV crisis overnight, because we actually have the answers. You know, the ability to give a safe supply of the drugs that are killing us right now. It exists in almost any pharmacy in the world. It's just the rules. So the overdose crisis back home or here is not a force of nature, it's a force of policy. There are policymakers, they have names. We need to point the finger because they have blood on their hands. Thanks very much.